Hello, in this video I want to talk about the last little video that we're going to do in terms of talking about Baudrillard for now at least. I want to talk about answering Baudrillard affirmatives and kind of finish off the series that I started before talking about how you should answer Baudrillard affirmatives. I think that this series is particularly important because I think there are so many times teams walk out of debates feeling like even if they like won or lost, they just didn't feel like they knew what was going on and they weren't confident what they were going for. And so really think about what are some of the central questions that you want to frame the debate around and where you might want to most strategically push the debate. I think is like a really good starting point for trying to figure out like what these things say. And you should definitely tune into the whole series because I think it's a lot of different types of breakdowns and angles into thinking about Baudrillard and the ways that you want to think about arguments that fit together. And so even if it might get a little bit repetitive, I think that just thinking about how different arguments apply in different places can help you like make connections that you didn't really see before and can be really useful in the long run even if you don't like see the value of watching the whole series now. So in this video, I kind of want to continue what we were talking about in terms of answering Baudrillard affs. In the last video, I talked a little bit about case, framework, and topicality and the way that I thought those things kind of fit together and the way that I think that they kind of fit together and how you answer Baudrillard broadly. Although, like, obviously not every team is reading framework or needs to read framework to beat Baudrillard. I think that there are obviously really good arguments that you can put on case regardless of what type of argument you're reading. And then the last one, I definitely think I went over some useful tips that I'll definitely try to take into this one to try to talk a little bit about both criticisms, counterplans, and disads. So let's start with criticisms. So when I'm thinking about like what are the best criticisms to read against Baudrillard, like I kind of said when I was thinking about the case debate in the last video, I've had the most success and think the most success can be drawn against Baudrillard when you really force the debate about materiality. I think there are a lot of interesting things not only to say about how Baudrillard kind of thinks about certain forms of identity formation and the way that identity formation kind of gets like sculpted into the system of sign and signifiers, but also because I think that it's important to swing the debate in a place where they kind of have less coverage in terms of like maybe examples or methodology work, which can really be a place where I feel like you can force an app to struggle. I think that the way in which a lot of Baudrillard apps are meant to function, they don't really prescribe a lot of ways in which people can take up material everyday action because there's such a disconnect between the types of ways that people take in information and that ability to actually transcend into something that creates or changes politics in the eyes of Baudrillard. And so usually debates kind of like move away from like a focus on that kind of like material existence. And I think really centering the debate there can be a really good place for you to like push a lot of the relevance of that theory out the way. I think that the way that you need to do this is by having a competitive theory that is able to win that there is a kind of like incompleteness to the way in which Baudrillard is maybe considering signs and signifiers in relationship to like formation around class, race, sex, gender, etc. And also to possibly win that whether or not that he's right about the relationship between signs and signifiers, the type of like impacts that the people that are within these marginalized communities face, put us in a situation where we have to be able to answer the question of what we should do in the face of the existence of this violence, or like our politics are kind of like bankrupt. And being really forcing the judge to kind of frame the debate through those stakes is really important to making this argument effective. And for me, when you're reading the criticism, that first starts on the framing portion of the criticism, and then it kind of moves into how you make your framing portion kind of fit with your thesis in such a way that the offense for it really pops. Another place that I think I can see a lot of people getting bogged down against these arguments when reading criticisms is that I think that there can be a lot of link repetitiveness in terms of like how you're really diversifying your offense against like these types of affirmatives. But I think that when you're able to win both indicts of how it's wrong theoretically in terms of how it thinks about identity broadly and the way in which it considers materiality, that you don't really need to cover many more bases to be able to just be able to win that there's a kind of like preferable method to the affirmative. And I think in that sense, being able to really win that you have an alternative that is able to do something to kind of answer these material questions or move in the right direction, or at least create an analytic that makes that type of politic possible, definitely starts you off in the place that you want to be to really like answer these affirmatives and like do so in such a way that really challenges the places that really strong, because you're in a place and thinking about a form of solvency that they don't have access to and don't make a claim around. And so you're already kind of like winning that with your link arguments. There's something about the affirmative that is parasitic to the process of doing the alternative, but there are also these external benefits that are like forefronted in the judge's mind because of the way that you're indicting how they like invalidate the ways in which like the impact calculus that you want to do like goes down. And so I think that kind of centering those places on the criticism can really bring you together to a variety of different types of criticisms that you can make from different types of theoretical lenses. But I think that trying to like touch all these different parts can be incredibly strategic and useful. Additionally, on the question of like counterplans and disads, I think that this is a place where I think that you can get really creative and do really interesting things, but I also think there's a way in which you can kind of just push like really generic arguments in such a way that you kind of of bog them down to really maybe having to deal with some of the consequences of like reading something like a fake plain text or anything like that. And I think in that sense, like when you pair this like with a framework or T argument, you can really put them in like in between a rock and a hard place, because you're either forcing them to kind of like no link out of these arguments and like bite a lot of the offense that you're going to make on T and a lot of the claims and impacts that you're going to make on abusiveness, or you end up just being able to win links to your counterplans and dissads that end up in a much more maybe familiar ground in terms of like how these debates go down, just because you may have more experience debating about counterplans and dissads broadly. But I think in the context where you're obviously preparing for your opponent to like come with the best arguments, the thing that you want to focus on, at least on the counterplan basis, I think is trying to figure out at what level it competes with the affirmative, not just at the level of like what the plain text functionally do, but why your plain text can't be included under the type of epistemological frame that the 1AC is undertaking, unless it's a pick or plain inclusive counterplan that you're trying to use to, like, for instance, say that you can access the type of epistemology that they're doing better, and there's something literally wrong with, like, for instance, where they wrote the plain text, or like what the plain text would actually do. Then I think that most of the time you really want to figure out a way in which you can both disprove the theory that they have of the world, maybe through a combination of arguments that you make on the case and on the counterplan, while simultaneously being able to forward and force them to defend the really material manifestations of the aff as hard as possible. And I think a similar thing is really true with dissads, because I think that when you're trying to do dissads, much like I said in the last set of videos when I was talking about how people can better read Baudrillard on the aff, the place that I think that you're always gonna have maybe like a more leverage in is like how you're able to do this impact calculus, but it requires you to get beyond like the critique that they want to make of the way that you evaluate bodies. And I think that the way to do this is both just explaining the stakes that are at hand and the kind of material consequences as such, and then pairing that with case arguments that you're making that indicts the way in which they try to make arguments about the way in which information relates to policy and the creation of policy. And doing such, I think, can really allow you to win the kind of internal links to make your dissad make a lot more sense, or at least put the judge in a world where evaluating the merits of the dissad is key. The place where you just don't want to end up is a world where the judge really isn't evaluating the merits of the dissad, because you've already been outframed by them winning top level thesis arguments. So whatever of these arguments that you want to take up, you always want to make sure that you're able to answer at least some of the top level arguments that they're making on the case page, regardless of like where you actually do it. Hopefully this video was helpful for you, and hopefully you'll tune into some of the other authors that I want to do when talking about postmodernism and other types of theories that you see in debate often. And yeah, hopefully you'll just keep watching. Thanks.